Welcome, and thank you for joining our series of webinars where we invite subject matter experts to provide guidance to us as we navigate these uncharted waters where there is no playbook. This is really very unprecedented. And so I am delighted today to welcome a true expert on the changing role of HR leadership during and post COVID-19, my friend and colleague, Janice Taylor Jr. I'm going to just say that we have had such an enormous number of people wanting to be on this call that it's going to be impossible for us to answer questions live, but we will provide those answers to you as you are giving us your email address. So those will come back to you, and we will also compile it into a report, which I will put on my website later. But Johnny Taylor started out in the legal profession, and then he went into corporate life and became in charge of legal affairs there, and then became GC and head of HR, taking on 2 roles at several corporations. And then he went on to be the CEO and president of a major not-for-profit organization before taking on his role as CEO and president of the Society for Human Resources Management, which he holds today. And he also is really very well versed in the C-suite and in the boardroom because he's held corporate positions in the as a director of corporations and in the not-for-profit world as well. And in 2019, he was honored by being appointed chair of the President's Advisory Board on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. So SHRM could not be in better hands. And now you have a record number of members, Johnny, over 300,000 members in 165 countries, impacting over 110 million employees. So I'm glad you're well equipped because you have a big job, particularly now during COVID-19. So welcome, Johnny Taylor, my friend for over 2 decades.
Well, I am so happy to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And Janice is of course, as gracious as she is talented, and she has been my friend. I don't know that I would brag that it was over 2 decades, because you're aging us.
I know. You're in the sandbox. You're in the sandbox.
That's right.
But Johnny, your society just completed a major survey, right? I think the audience would like to hear about this. And it was data that you compiled from HR leaders. And it was about the top challenges for employers and the impact of COVID-19 on business practices. Can you comment on this?
I can. You know, it's interesting. Let me start. A lot of folks don't realize that SHRM has a research department, and we call it our knowledge department. And it's a group of PhDs, IO psychologists, researchers, statisticians, and we actually do, oftentimes the thought is that we're just doing sort of serving our members. Well, one of the key parts of serving our members is to equip them with the latest data so that, you know, increasingly HR is a data-informed profession, so that you can actually make good decisions and advise your clients, being other business leaders. So we now at the beginning of this, now it feels like it's been forever, but 16 weeks or so ago, when we all began to deal with and hear rumblings of this thing called COVID-19, we said, what should we be doing? So we began collecting data, and in 2 different pieces. So we have the pulse surveys that go out, and we talk with employees and employers, C-suite leaders, as well as politicians. So we want to make sure that we get the full perspective. And now that we're 4 months or so into it, we're starting to see some trends and gather longitudinal data. So how people felt in January versus February, March, and now April. And so we have a lot of data. We are now releasing this new data, this new survey, most recent survey results. And I'd like to talk with you about it very quickly. And some of it is intuitive, and some of it's actually counterintuitive. So let me start with the number 1 issue, the top challenge facing employers. And again, I see over 500 of you here. Thank you so much for coming out today and taking time away from your schedules. 71%, nearly 3 in 4 employers are struggling to adjust to remote work. And you can read that, but let me give that a little flavor. We're hearing a couple of things. One, even if we had the technology, so we have Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever the technology is, a lot of our employees aren't comfortable yet using this technology. So we think we can communicate with them. We think that it is as good as in person, and it's not. And so that's making it very difficult for employees. The other thing that employers are struggling with is ensuring productivity, because, and I'll share this in some of our other data, but it's not a given that people are more productive working remotely. You'd like to think that because you have that extra hour or two in the morning and the evening because of your commute, you don't have to get on the road and dress and do all of that, that people therefore have 4 extra hours, and employers will inure to the benefit of that. It's not necessarily so. We're finding that some employees are not motivated if you are not there, if they're not in an environment. So more to come. But in fact, 3/4 of employers nearly are struggling to adjust to this remote work reality. The other headline that I saw was that 65% of employers say maintaining employee morale is a challenge. And again, I don't think I have to tell those of you now, almost 600 online now, but it is much, much more difficult. We are seeing an onslaught. In fact, one of our findings is that there's been a 27% increase of employers saying, 27% of employers say they've seen an increase in the requests for employee assistance. The isolation, the forced isolation, is really beginning to take a toll on the individual employee, and therefore employee morale in the collective sense is really hard to maintain right now. When you're hearing about your family members losing their jobs, your friends, the layoffs, the doom and gloom of the 24-hour news cycle, it really is beginning to play on people's mental health. And therefore, this is now a real challenge for HR professionals. But quickly, we also found that 1/3 of employers are facing difficulties with company culture. And we're addressing it, but it really is, culture was all the buzzword 5 months ago. And it didn't just go away because of coronavirus. We still, in fact, arguably have more of an obligation to be clear about our culture, to reinforce it and use it to help us get most out of our employees, and for them to get the most out of the employment experience. Employee productivity. Our research tells us that 31% of employees say they are more productive. This is what I was alluding to earlier, by working remotely. But that leaves 69% of us say we are either as productive or less productive. So this notion, again, this assumption that we had that people would be more productive is just not playing out as we thought it would. Now, I believe over time and with the right interventions, we're going to get there and improve it. But there's a significant, portion of the population who just won't be as productive working remotely, notwithstanding what we're doing. And employers are feeling that, especially small and medium-sized employers where you don't have multiple levels of employees doing the same job. If you have 2 people doing a job and one is not properly motivated by working remotely and therefore not productive, you're really harming your business. And then finally, leave regulations. We're just trying to sort it. I mean, what do you do in an environment? Most of us all of us, if you complied with the FMLA, had leave, but it was unpaid leave. And so the question of what's the new reality, if people are forced, you say, don't come to work unless you're healthy, but by the way, if you don't come to work, I'm not going to pay you. Employees are they're forced to make a choice, and it's forced all of us to revisit our leave policies that in the past were pretty simple. If you take time, 10, 12 weeks off after you have a kid, that's for you and your significant other to work out. And now employers are saying, maybe we're going to have to revisit this. And I think that's part of the silver lining that I'm going to speak to more.
So what on business practices, this is a major impact, right? The lack of productivity. What are HR professionals to do with all of this data that you're coming forth with? This is problematic from a leadership standpoint, right?
You can't make it up. I mean, it's at a level that most of us don't fully appreciate. So the first thing we know is that overall in business, this is impacting employers big time. 40% of employers are either going to shut down their business totally or certain aspects of their business, which of course has a ripple effect on people. 83%, nearly all employers are adjusting their business practices. And let me tell you what we know. So half are no longer hiring. Just imagine that. And I want to be clear and dissect this for you. Some percentage of them are not hiring because they're laying off or going out of business. I told you 40% have shut down certain aspects of their business. But a significant number of these people are saying, we won't hire because we just aren't confident that I can interview someone virtually and hire sight unseen. Back to that human experience. I want to sit across the table from that person at a desk, even if I recognize that 6 feet, but I want to do that. I was on a call this morning with world HR leaders, and they call it the 1.5 meter rule or the 2 meter rule, but essentially it's our converted 6 feet social distancing. But they're saying without that, I'm not going to hire. So we have open jobs. You know, for all of the headlines of 21 million people filing for unemployment, we still have about 6 million open jobs in America. My former SHRM board member, Donna Morris, who is now the CHRO at Walmart, announced 150,000 openings. There are certain industries that are hiring in significant numbers, but they're saying it's really tough to do it without seeing the person. Number two, a third nearly of laid off workers, employers have decided they're going to lay off workers. And there's a big difference between a layoff and a furlough. The number is much higher for furloughs, but think about this. 1/3 of employers have said they're going to lay off their workers, and that 15% say they have no plan to rehire. That's really disturbing. I mean, the idea that 15%, and I think back, we were lamenting 3.5% unemployment just 3-4 months ago, and now think about the world that we live in. Another interesting stat was 38%, nearly 40% have decreased employee hours. And that's that furlough kind of world where people are. I saw yesterday, Arizona State University, a huge major employer is now furloughing their employees. I mean, that's a significant period of time, and freezing all salary, by the way, or reducing it. 14% have hired more employees. And this is, again, one of the things that I don't think the news and HR practitioners, we don't talk about some positive news. Boeing has announced that they're reopening this week their Washington State facilities. 27,000 employees are going back to work. It will be really fascinating for us to watch how they do that. Remember, that's Washington State, that's Seattle. That was in many ways early ground zero because of that nursing home situation where hundreds of people died. So we're thinking about it, but 10% are considering it. So you put that together, about 1/4 of employers are saying, I'm either hiring or considering. And for what it's worth, SHRM is hiring right now because business has to go on. And then finally, about 1/3 are offering additional paid leave for employees. And that's something that, frankly, is I think a very positive trend, because I would argue that Family and Medical Leave Act has been around for a very long time, unpaid, and this is a positive trend, and another 18% are considering it to it. So at the end of the day, about half of the business workers and business workers, I should call that, are saying that we are going to consider or we're going to offer additional paid leave so that our employees aren't being forced to come back to work, potentially when they're not well, simply because they need financial security income coming in.
So Johnny, the audience on this phone call, they can get the information about the survey and maybe some best practices and what people are doing here from you, from SHRM.
SHRM.org, you go to the Knowledge Center, there's tons. And again, it's being updated not once a month, once a week, once a day.
Right. So let me ask you, in 2008, we had the financial crisis, right? That was not pretty either, but it was all about capital adequacy, right? And getting on with the economy. Now it's about employee health, employee safety, employee well-being in social settings to get the economy going again. Right? And the governors of different states are doing it a little bit differently. Some we think maybe not as prudent as others. But so what are the HR policies and practices that you see emerging from what you surveyed and what you see happening that will be significant changes? And what will we see when we return to the workplace?
Well, that's at the core of it. The number one question is, who is going to return to the workplace? right? We now know with about 78% of employers are now working remotely. So, but the question is when we can safely reopen a Boeing, for example. What I can tell you is that PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, just recently released a study of CFOs who are now questioning whether or not they're going to bring employees back to the workplace. Not bring them back, but in the past, if you think about what work from home has been, it's been a perk or an accommodation by the employer almost as a favor to the employee. But the CFOs, those number crunchers, have all sat down and said, gosh, you know, if half of our workplace in Manhattan didn't need to come to this building, we could reduce our expenses significantly and not renew that office lease. We won't have to give them coffee and drinks and all of that and office furniture. I mean, this might work out for us. So what we're seeing is a significant discussion around remote work becoming a more widely accepted alternative. But again, not as an accommodation for or at the request of an employee. It actually may be mandated, which later on I'll talk to you about that. That's going to be complicated because there's a significant percentage of your employees who say, I don't want mandated work from home, remote work. What I want is to use it as a tool in my toolbox, flexibility-wise, if I have a sick kid or if I'm pregnant, if whatever. But the idea of mandating that this job will heretofore, going forward, will be done remotely has some real risk because a lot of employees aren't comfortable with that. Just a side note to that fact, we were talking, you'd assume that the millennials and Generation Z are really excited about remote work. And what we're hearing is, again, only if it were flexible. We are seeing that the younger population is literally saying, I need to go back to work. I want to see my friends. I want to develop relationships, etc. And so this idea that everyone's going to go to, we're going to remote work, I think is something that frankly, the financial types and other business leaders are thinking about. At the same time, the employees are saying, not so much. I think we're going to see a hybrid there, but we will more widely accept it as an option. And I think that's a net a positive thing. Finding talent is going to become easier. I mean, it's just math, right? 3.5% unemployment. Now, you know, upwards, some say as many as, I don't think it's 30%, but it's going to be a significant number. And at least in the initial period, we will be able to find talent easier. Now, easier means they will be more available. I don't know, because of what I mentioned in the beginning, that it'll necessarily be easy, because it's hard enough to recruit, to get a good sense of who someone is when you're sitting across from them and you have multiple opportunities to get a sense of who they are, especially with the focus on culture these days. Well, so some employers are saying this is going to be, we know that there's going to be a larger pool available. I'm just not necessarily sure that it's going to be easier to do it. And the fact of the matter is that's the world that we're going to live in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Virtual learning. This is really good. I mean, there were so many of us who argued, well, you can't learn as effectively virtually. And we're now testing that and we're disproving that. I think it gives employees right now, and I've said to my employees, that hour that you used to commute to work in the morning and in the afternoon, use that now, not for SHRM per se, but use it to improve yourself. Make sure that you have a new set of skills when you come back from this, and you can educate yourself virtually and be a much stronger and better employee for me and more competitive in the overall landscape. Virtual reality, we're doing it right now. Who'd have thunk? I mean, I've resisted this big time, all of this Zoom and GoToMeeting and Skype, and I just hated this whole thing, right? But we're doing it and we're collaborating, and I can see you all and you're writing me. We're essentially using a new muscle that we hadn't used before. And it's really kind of exciting. I think we will see more of it, and that net will be positive. I must caution you though, I don't think it will replace or should replace real life interaction, human beings, because we need that as well. Telemedicine, this is an area that is really taking off. In the past, so I called my doctor. I have a little 9-year-old daughter, and she had a temperature, 103-degree temperature. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get her to an emergency room, an urgent care or something. And, that was considered the absolute right way to manage and to take care of your child. Well, the ER doctor, when I called her pediatrician, she said, the ER is the last place you want to be right now. Frankly, it was always the last place you want to be because it's not necessarily healthy. There are a whole bunch of sick people there. So they were able to do much of the work, the diagnosis, all of it, including the prescription of medicine, et cetera. I'm pleased to report a couple of weeks later, she's well. Telemedicine is something that we've resisted because we thought you had to go see a doctor, but now not so much. And so I think employees are recognizing the value of it. The one area where we know we're seeing an uptick, and I alluded to this earlier, is in mental health. Everyone is focused on the physical health implications of coronavirus. Not enough people are focused on mental health. And so telemedicine can be particularly good. Think about how private it is. You don't have to have the shame of going into a doctor's office to go see a psychiatrist or a social worker or a counselor. You can do it one-on-one through this equipment that we're currently all communicating through. So telemedicine for mental health, which is a big, big issue right now arising out of the COVID-19, the isolation, the depression, domestic violence, divorce filings, every one of these issues, these human issues that do impact the world of work and employee productivity are being impacted. So we're recommending heavily that people consider telemedicine, especially for your employees who are suffering from isolation and everything that flows out of that. And then finally, I've alluded to it again, employers are going to be more fiscally conservative than they were in the prior decade. They have to. There's just, with the exception of the companies that are doing really well right now, and even they are going to find a way to operate more conservatively, something we're not necessarily, planning to talk about now, but so too are employees. And that's going to be interesting as well, is employees as well as employers are all rethinking, that old rule of have 3 to 6 months of your salary in the bank. There are a lot of people, especially Americans, who didn't have it and are now feeling the consequences of that.
So Johnny, I was an HR director for a publicly traded company in a prior life and now doing executive search, placing HR directors. How is the role of the HR leader and his or her staff going to change going forward? You mentioned a number of things here, even with regard to the mental health. And some companies I know have extended mental health benefits and therapists and counseling to their employees. So how does the role of the HR leader change during and post COVID-19 to address some of these major issues?
2 real life examples of that. And one is, I was being interviewed by The Economist on an article and said this, and it resonated really well with the writer, and you all may have seen the piece, but basically I've said what Y2K did for technology professionals, be the CTO or anyone in technology, and what 2008 did for financial professionals, CFOs down, is what COVID has done for HR professionals. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is we are ground zero. Another reporter just recently said, when we were talking, he used a term that I'd used, but I was uncomfortable using it. He said, HR people are first responders in this instance. They are corporate business first responders. And if you think about it, this is exactly the moment. I was talking with a CEO, Fortune 250 CEO recently, who said to me, and I think I shared this with you, Janice, he said, I have talked with my HR head more in the last 8 weeks than I did in the prior 8 years. He said, it's just, you are my go-to. And I now totally appreciate what I've been missing. The strategy. Ultimately, companies and employers, you exist with 2 sort of resource bases, people and financial capital. So it's sort of human capital and financial capital. And we so over-indexed our focus on financial capital and not really focused on human capital. What coronavirus has said is both of these things are real, and we are going to need to focus equally. It's back to the old Jack Welch, God bless him, thinking that I have my CFO on my one side and my CHRO on the other side. That's the reality. So now we can celebrate about that if we will, but I can tell you the downside is because of that, very, very clearly the weak players are going to be surfaced. If you are not equipped to provide very good tactical and strategic advice and counsel to your clients, this actually may harm you, because for the first time, the CEOs and the other C-suite executives are looking to say, okay, I am the Chief Technology Officer, HR, how can you help me keep my employees engaged and be effective? And you don't have a party to throw. We don't have a whole bunch of excess money to throw around. They're not here personally. What are you going to do to help me innovatively solve for my challenges, my human capital challenges in this environment? So to me, it's a wonderful opportunity. And on the other hand, for people who are not equipping themselves, and I want to just point out here, this is critical. When I see over 600 people on this webinar, you're doing exactly what each of us have to do, and that is equip ourselves to step up to this new challenge. Again, it's not enough to celebrate that we're now, that proverbial seat at the table, you're in the middle of it. It is now important to be able to deliver while you're there. The challenges ahead, you'll see a slide in the front of you that really kind of speak to it. The potential long-term economic hardship. I was on this call, as I talked about this morning, and the head of Pakistan, I think it is, he may have been the head of labor, the labor minister or whatever, but he made the statement that there will be more post-COVID deaths as a result of the starvation. In other words, the financial, the long-term economic hardships that are going to go downstream and negatively, literally, physically kill people. And so we as HR people have to think about that. As I said, suicides are up. Domestic violence is up. So we've got to think about the human capital issues, the considerations going forward that are outside of just pure dollars and cents. It's impact on people and therefore on the organization. One of the things that and I smile because, business continuity plans, I'm a Floridian, born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, and we were always, our business continuity plans never contemplated infectious disease. I mean, there were movies about, some big virus taking over, but we didn't think that real. Our threats were hurricanes. On the West Coast, earthquakes, things like that. We never built business continuity plans contemplating in reality that an infectious disease policy was something we had to undertake. Well, HR professionals need to own that because at its core, our buildings, our infrastructure is fine. It's the people who are impacted and people are impacted by infectious diseases. Thirdly, organizations, and specifically HR, will need to be stewards of health, physical and mental health, continuity, and wellness. And when I get to this is not just as we get people back to work, but it's afterwards, because a lot of our employees, and I'm seeing it here, my employees at SHRM, we've been fortunate enough, blessed enough not to have to lay off. But I can tell you, a number of our employees, their spouses, their roommates. I mean, think about it. You got two Generation Zs coming out of college who are renting an apartment together. One of them loses his or her job. The other person doesn't want to put their friend out on the street, but they now have to cover the full mortgage, a rent payment, if you will, on one salary. So these are the issues that we are going to have to be stewards of, helping people, financial health, mental health, physical health. Again, we are truly first responders. When someone runs into these problems, they call on us. And so we've got to think about how do we serve in a post-COVID world. And then finally, 15%, and I think this number is on its way up. This is what we have as of April 2020, of organizations have already stated their intent to permanently implement new realities of operations in their future. So when we do bring people back into the workplace, and we've decided who those people are, think about some of the things. Do we bring everyone back, or do we ask older employees or people who have compromised immune systems to stay home? And is it an ask or is it a mandate? You say, you fit into the target area, you can't come back. We're going to take young, healthy people. Well, there are all sorts of EEOC issues arising out of that. So we are all trying to figure out, I don't have to tell anyone in this call, but think about this. 6 months ago, the EEOC said blanket policies requiring that people take a temperature, or that employers take people's temperature before they come to work. That was illegal. Well, guess what? They've said not so much. Think about 6 months ago, if you were a gig worker, you didn't qualify for unemployment insurance benefit. Now you do. And I love that when I talk to people, Janice, are laughing because for all of these folks who wanted to be in the gig worker or gig economy so badly, I'm like, so let me tell you how this works. So I want to apply for unemployment. I was just with a woman yesterday at SHRM office. She says, I want to apply for unemployment insurance. I said, but you were never employed. Like, if you think about this, you want both sides of it. So the point is, all of this is forcing us to think differently. And HR leaders, no matter if you're the CHRO, a manager, an HR consultant, you have clients who are looking to you for advice and counsel.
So, Johnny, you talked about the gig worker, the independent contractor versus the employees. Is that going to change then dramatically during and post-COVID-19?
Yeah, in fact, no question. We're having discussions now with the Secretary of Labor, and we're talking with all sorts of employers to figure out, how do you do this going forward? You have such a significant percentage of the U.S. population having, even if they have a day job, they're doing, these side gigs. And how going forward do we recharacterize? If you think about it, we haven't really revisited this since the 1938s. Since 1938, early 40s, Fair Labor Standards Act. We began this artificial sort of labeling of an independent contractor and an employee. And the fact of the matter is, they were all doing work. So again, I'm an optimist. So I'm saying there's some real benefits that are going to come from this entire experience, the least of which is HR now really matters. But then it also is, we're going to revisit some of our long-standing ridiculous policies, not offering paid leave, making this artificial sort of difference between an employee and a gig worker. I mean, there are a lot of things that are being revisited. And I think the net is just going to be positive for us.
So Johnny, you've been in that HR seat. You've been the GC and the head of HR. You've run companies. And so I'm going to quote you. You said that for HR leaders, it is inspiration that takes us into the lion's pit. And it's our aspiration that gets us out alive.
Yes.
What's your parting advice? We're getting close on time, but I'm going to go over a little bit and we're probably going to have you back because there's so much to cover. It's all about human capital today. So what are those leadership qualities that CEOs and boards are going to be looking for in the HR leaders going forward?
And three that come to mind right away. There's probably a litany of them and people will have them. But number one, you've got to lead. This is our opportunity to lead. We have got to do it, though, in a very balanced way. I talk about, and the essence of our work is to balance people and profit. And some in our profession find ourselves, we don't like that profit word. But the reality is you can't pay your people if you don't make a profit. So we've got to figure out how to do that. And this is that moment where HR people are truly business people. We've always been, but this is the moment. The third area is we've got to become really good communicators. This is not the marketing or the internal communications PR group's time. What your organization says, what your CEO says, what your people managers, those individuals who are not in HR but who manage people's lives, what they communicate to employees is going to be critical. And equally important is what those employees hear. So it doesn't even matter in some ways what you say, it's what they hear. Those three things are the things that HR people are going to have to pull. We're going to have to do that on steroids. And finally, I said three, but it's courage. We are going to have the courage to sit down with other business leaders. And remember that I'm not the guy who subscribes to HR being a business partner. I think we are part of the business, and there is a difference. So this notion, you are front and center, and you've got to have the courage to speak up and say, Janice, in your business, I just had this conversation with another CEO. He says, well, I'm not hiring right now. I said, actually, this is the opportunity. You already told me that you had some weak people on your team. This might be your opportunity to go shopping because there's talent that you could not have gotten 6 months ago that you right now can get because they're in the market and weren't in the past. There's just an opportunity. So our optimism is what we must rely on as HR people if we want to bring our employees back into the workplace on an up note.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And in fact, some of our clients are looking to they do want to see who they're going to be hiring, so it may be delayed somewhat, but they're looking for talent now. They
That's
haven't canceled any of the searches. In fact, we just got a new one. So they're looking for that talent.
congratulations.
So, but I'm going to ask you, so for SHRM going forward, what's next for you in terms of taking the organization forward during post-COVID-19? And what other advice would you have for the HR leaders out there before we close?
Number one, policy. SHRM is going to be relying on feedback from all of you and members around. We have to understand what's good policy look like going forward. And HR people know, it's not left to the politicians. Need SHRM to inform their policy, or they make very bad policy and we're stuck with it. So number one is policy. Number two is SHRM is going to be focused on serving our members. The cobbler's kids have no shoes. Too often, we haven't focused on equipping HR people for the new reality and the new challenges that they're going to face when people come into the workplace, the people who are going to remain at home, all of the changes in the laws that are going to come as a result of this. We are already building up our knowledge department so that, and for members, you can call and speak to a live person, chat, email, and get advice. I'm confronting this issue. What should I do? This is what we're offering up, and we're building up our capability there. And then finally, what SHRM is going to do is really focus on, I like to think of there being three areas. There are policy elites. Those are public officials who are either elected or appointed, secretaries and governors, etc. There are business elites who are CEOs. We are having more and more serious conversations with CEOs and influencing how they see people, human capital, and HR. And then there are HR professionals. So we're convening senior HR leaders to say, let's rethink this moment. We have this moment when we open. So it's very prospective in our view, how we're going to be equipped to do this and do it well. Here, and I'm going to close with this. We, Janice, this is such an opportunity. I hate to take, it feels bottom feeder almost to say, but there is an opportunity. This crisis has created an opportunity for HR. If the leaders who are now turning to us don't get a good response, we will have done more damage to our profession and to our reputation than if they never turn to us anyway. Right? You have an opportunity now to meet, exceed their expectations, and SHRM has to help equip you and your staff with the skills to do it.
That is such good advice. And if you don't know the answer, go to SHRM, get the answer, but for goodness sakes, go back to your CEO and your board with good, solid advice. That's what the HR function is all about. It's all about people. Today, it's about people make the organization. We could have technology, we can have good financial controls, but we need people to run the organization, and that's what you're all about. So I just want to close with a quote from Governor Cuomo. And he said it this week, actually. He gave a little bit of his personal history with his family. He said, but there is a silver lining to this. This too will pass. And it's about the future is ours. We can create it and we can build it better. So I think to your point, Johnny, we can build the HR function to be better, more impactful going forward, and really helping people in the workplace and therefore helping society. And I think that's part of your mantra, is it not?
Yes, yes. Better workplace, better world.
Better world. So better workplace, better world. And I want to just say, stay safe, stay well to everybody on the call. If you have questions, Johnny will answer them. We will get the answers out to you and we will put it in the report. Johnny Taylor, thank you so very much for joining us today. I know you're terribly busy. We will get back to you and you will give us some more advice and guide us through these uncharted waters. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.